Hey lady, how you doing? Okay. All right, so, and stream. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Who was that? Sorry, who was that? Oh, okay. It's your ringtone. All right, cool. Hey, I'd like to welcome everybody back. I hope you enjoyed your short holiday there Monday, not coming into class. Was everybody able to hear the broadcast? Was the audio good enough online? I know it wasn't exciting, but you know what? It's not that exciting when you're sitting in class, so how bad can it get, right? Fantastic. How about this? I've decided that what I'm going to do for the next 3 weeks of class is I'm going to allow you to come to one class a week online as long as you're on the live stream. How does that sound? Would that be okay? For the next 3 weeks. Now, here's the deal. You'll have to log in just like normal. You'll have to say hello just like normal and stay engaged on the chat. But we're going to allow you to do that. Does that sound good? Fantastic. Okay, I see we have some more people on the live broadcast now. Shruti, Elizabeth, and Sarah. Thanks. It's good to see you. Real quick, let's go to some announcements before we get started. Writing assignment number 2. I am in the middle of grading it, and as I promised, the in-class students, your assignments have all been graded. Writing assignment 2 has been graded. For you online students, I'm working on your assignments, but there were like 60 of them. I'm about halfway done. I promise I will have them done by tomorrow night at the latest, because I'm not going to let those assignments ruin my weekend, so I will get them done. Okay, here's the deal. Remember, if you received a grade of 1, you can still redo this assignment and resubmit it. Remember, 1 means it doesn't quite meet expectations. There'll be some feedback on the rubric, make the changes and resubmit it. Remember, you have to turn in 4 assignments that meet expectations in order to achieve the grade of A. 4 out of the 6 writing assignments. And so we've got 2 of them already done and graded, and the third one should be in this weekend. Does anybody have any questions in class about the writing assignments? Anybody online have any questions about the writing assignments? I see we have Sky's also in the room, and Ellen. Hi, thanks for coming in today. All right. Hello, how you doing? Good to see you. All right, so we just talked about the writing assignments. And one final announcement. If you'll look over here, you'll notice that the weekly webinar that we do in Microsoft Teams on Thursday nights, something came up. I have to move the webinar to tonight. So we're going to meet tonight at your meeting time. For those of you who are in my online class, you know your meeting time is from 6 to 7 p.m. And you students know that our meeting time for the seated class in Microsoft Teams is going to be from 7 to 8 p.m. If you can't make it tonight, no big deal. Just go do the discussion board that's due on Thursday. What's up, Torrance? How you doing, my friend? Those of you who walked in a couple seconds late, make sure to get attendance before you leave today, okay? So I can make sure to get, because there's about 4 or 5 people that walked in. All right, do we have any questions so far? Ellen Williams online has a question. She had a question about the writing assignments. After I complete the 4 with a grade of 2 or higher, does that mean that I don't have to do any other writing assignments? Absolutely. That's exactly what that means. Once you get 16 collaboration points, you don't need to do any more discussion boards. Hopefully you'll like the discussion boards in the webinar enough that you'll come back. Once you get enough collaboration points, you're done with those. Once you do 4 writing assignments at a level of 2, you are done with that as well. And so if you work real hard the first 4 or 5 weeks, as some of you are, you can coast the last couple of weeks in the class, okay? That's a great question, Ellen. Anybody else have a question before we move on? All right, fantastic. So, let's see, Ellen Williams says thanks. You are quite welcome. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Module 4, IRobot, Cognition and the Rise of Artificial Intelligence. Now, one of the things you hear each and every day is that AI is going to end our life. AI is here. It's all over. And there are people who feel like this is the end of the universe. They may or may not be right. But what I'd like to do today is to talk to you a little bit about this fascination with AI and how, more specifically, how humans are different than computers. So what we're going to be talking about in terms of chapters today, if you'll go to what you'll see, we're going to be talking about Chapter 10, Emotions and Motivation. That's really what the focus of today's lecture is. And what I'm going to try to argue to you is that human beings are different and maybe better than computers because we have motivation and emotion. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Hello. All right. So if you would, please talk to me after class to get attendance. All right. All right. Let's see. So that's that. Now, the neat thing is, one of the things I put for the class, I did put for at the beginning of this week's module, is the book IRobot. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of IRobot, the science fiction classic by the science fiction classic writer Isaac Asimov. Okay, God bless. Thank you, somebody, for shaking your head yes. Okay, I didn't want to feel like the only nerd in here. Isaac Asimov wrote this book. As soon as computers were invented, everybody realized what that meant in terms of robots and humans in the future. And he wrote this series of short stories called IRobot, where he actually even created the term of robo-psychology. Now, robo-psychology is not a real thing, okay? However, there are people in the field of psychology who are interested in the interface that humans and computers are having and how we can make computers more human-like. And so those people one day might create the field of robo-psychology. Actually, you know what? One of you might even create the field of robo-psychology based upon this class. Who knows? So let's talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. Here we go. Right here. Let's go to my presentation. Okay. Now, here's the deal. As soon as the cognitive psychology and the artificial intelligence were born in the 1950s and 60s, the military got interested. The United States military has always been interested in battling the Russians or whoever and trying to create world dominance for humans. And we wanted to do that with computers. So as soon as the military found out about artificial intelligence, DARPA, these other defense agencies started dumping tons of money into artificial intelligence. Now, if you'll remember from Monday, I talked to you about the 2 theories of human beings. We're either tabula rasa, or as the continental rationalist said, we have a set of instructions already programmed into our brain. Now, that might have seemed like just an obscure philosophical disagreement that we could be talking about. But when you go to design a mind, how do you design a mind? Do you design a mind that's already pre-formatted, if you will, with all of the instructions, like a rationalist would argue? Or do you make a system that's very minimal that has to build itself based upon learning? So the earliest theories of artificial intelligence were we could use this symbolic approach and try to program all the instructions into the computer so that it could bounce around the world, or we could say maybe build a more a simpler system and let it build itself through experience. Well, the earliest approaches were this symbolic approach. And one of the things that they spent their time focusing on was problem solving. And so if you look at this chart right here, it comes from your textbook. Now, if you look in chapter 7, Thinking and Problem Solving, the intelligence chapter, they've got a little section on how people solve problems. The reason that we have this section on how people solve problems is because these artificial intelligence people were trying to mimic the way that human beings solve problems. And so they said, well, maybe some people use a trial and error approach. Maybe some people use an algorithmic approach. And so programs were designed that tried to solve human problems. Now, what you see right here is I'm going to argue that there were problems with this approach. It turns out problems like chess, a game, a strategic game, 4 moves into a chess game. There are already 10 million different positions. It's hard to program a computer for all of the flexible situations and ways in which human beings have to solve problems. And so this approach was not very successful, and we fell into what you might call an artificial intelligence winter. I put a link down here so you can read about these artificial intelligence winters. What they do is they've tried to develop artificial intelligence, and it just hasn't worked. It's really, really difficult to figure out how a person thinks, to reproduce what you do so easily in your day-to-day life. It's amazingly complex because you can deal with inadequacies, incompleteness, you can think flexibly, you can make assumptions. There's all these kinds of things that you can do that can't be programmed, that we have trouble programming into a computer. So the symbolic approach really just failed. Now, I will tell you what we know now is they've gone back to the board and we've had a little more success with what you might call the connectionist approach or the machine learning approach. Now what we do is instead of trying to program the machine to know everything at the beginning, we program in simpler programs and let the machine learn based on experience. And it turns out that that approach is actually leading us to more successful results. Now, does that mean now that we've got ChatGPT that it's all over for human beings? No. I'd like to differentiate between what we might call limited artificial intelligence and what we might call general artificial intelligence. Did you know that there is an artificial intelligence program that you can teach to sense things? You can put it in a satellite, run it over the jungles of Africa, and teach it to spot elephants and poachers and help, and it can sense patterns and help us fight poachers. Did you know that we have natural language programs like ChatGPT that can have a conversation with you? There are still further programs that can solve problems like playing chess and kicking a grandmaster's butt in a game of chess. We've got programs that can speak, that can solve problems, that can sense patterns. But you know what we don't have? A computer that can do all of those at the same time. Right? I can program a computer to do one thing that you can do really well, but it can't do the flexible kinds of cognitive tasks that you can do. And so for now, we are safe from artificial intelligence because artificial general intelligence doesn't exist yet, okay? So that's sort of my thought for why we shouldn't worry about AI right now. But let's talk about the ways in which human beings are a little bit different than animals. And by the way, I see Bradley Dysert's here. Thank you for coming in. Bradley, if there's anybody else online that wants to stop in and say hello, I would appreciate that. Thank you very much for joining our broadcast. So one way in which human beings are different than computers is our ability to use this emotional component. Now, they're actually trying to create something called social artificial intelligence, which mimics our ability to experience and respond to other people's emotions. That's a very important component of your psychological functioning that goes outside this idea of programming you like a computer program. So let's talk a little bit about emotions. Why are emotions valuable?
Great communication.
Oh, great. What do you mean by that? You're exactly right, but what do you mean by as a communication tool?
They help others understand how you feel, the way you react to emotions. They can determine if you're actually angry. They can determine like an inflection of a phrase.
Wow, absolutely. They really smooth over social communication. Fantastic. Anything else? They also are a guidepost to our safety. If something scares the hell out of you, you need to avoid said thing, right? So if you think about it, emotions are very valuable for us. They allow us to get outside of our reflexes because I can think about how something made me feel last week or the week away. You know what I mean? It helps me create memories so I no longer have to respond reflexively. It provides safety value because I can know when I'm safe and when I need to run away. And it also smooths social communication. So emotions are very important for how human beings function and what makes us better than, superior to, in my opinion, to computer programs and artificial intelligence. Now, what your brain's going to talk about is the different parts of your brain that are responsible for your emotions. And I'm going to talk about two parts. Your limbic system, which is your subcortical area. Remember, we talked about brains as having a subcortical, non-conscious area, and then a cortical area. So emotions have the same thing. They have a limbic system, which is your subcortical area, and that connects with your frontal lobe, and to a certain degree, your temporal lobe, which are your conscious memory and impulse control centers right here. Right? And so now here's the deal. I don't know, has anybody ever been scared by somebody who played the practical joke, jumped out behind a door and scared the hell out of you, right? Don't you hate that? Now, you ever notice you go through two emotions quite quickly? The first is absolute terror, right? And then the second one, depending upon your sense of humor, is either laughter and joy or anger at the person that scared you. You notice how you go through those two quick emotions? Now, what I'm going to argue to you is the first emotion is what we call the quick pathway. This is the part of your brain that was built for your survival. It's your fight or flight response. When something scares you, this thing lights up super duper quick. It is your speedy emotional response center. However, you live in a very complex world with complex emotions and complex feelings and complex things that you can see. So you need to think carefully about the things that you see and say, wait a minute, that person jumped out and yelled boo, but I remember that face. That's William Bazitsky. He's a student in my class and he has a sense of humor and he's probably playing a joke, and I'm going to think all these deep thoughts in a half a second, and I'm going to think more deeply about what's happening to me. And that's sort of the slow path to my emotional functioning. And all of our emotions, if you will, have a fast path that's automatic, that's built into the system, and a slow path that we develop as we go through our early school years. Olivia, I'll bet your child probably throws tantrums every now and then, has bad attitude, right? Every day, absolutely. And that's because that control mechanism in the frontal lobe isn't quite matured and it hasn't learned how to control that amygdala yet. So when your daughter gets angry and that amygdala lights up, she can't moderate that emotional functioning. And what you have to do is to help her learn that skill and forge that neural pathway between her amygdala and her frontal lobe. And so when you look at this map right here, this is going to show you the limbic system and the cerebral cortex and the structure called the thalamus. Now, everything you experience that you can consciously experience goes through your thalamus, okay? So that's like the person who's watching, and the thalamus sees, oh, it's a shark. oh, it's a tiger. Ooh, it's a steak dinner, whatever it is I want. Your thalamus notices that sensory experience and then communicates with your limbic system, starting with your amygdala. Now, your amygdala is where you get that fight or flight emotional response that happens super duper quickly. But at the same time, your thalamus is sending information to your frontal lobe so that you can think about the feared or desired object a little more carefully. And so what happens is your first emotional response is that quick trigger, but followed almost immediately after is the mediated emotion that comes from your frontal lobe. Now, the part of your brain that connects those two is the hippocampus. Your hippocampus is that bridge. As I said on Monday, it's important for storing memories on your brain. It's very important for connecting your emotions with the things that you know that make you happy or sad. So you can think about emotions as sort of having, if you will, these two processes. And I want you to be familiar with what we call the limbic system, okay? The thalamus, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, and the hippocampus. Now, I haven't mentioned the hypothalamus yet, but the hypothalamus is the part of your brain that kicks off that cascade of hormones that happens when you have a fight or flight experience. So your amygdala says, yes, it is time for me to run away from this saber-toothed tiger. Okay, now my heart has to start beating fast, my lungs have to start breathing, and all of that stuff has to happen. My hypothalamus is the part of my brain that causes hormones to be dumped into my body, like adrenaline, that cause me to get activated. And so all of these are part of your emotional response. Now, human beings have these. Computers, as of yet, don't have the ability to mimic these sort of emotional desires. And if you think about it, how often every day is your behavior determined by your feelings? I don't like this person, I'm not going over there. I like this, so I'm going there. Ooh, they're having spaghetti. I like spaghetti, so I'll go over to this person's house. We're using our emotions to help us navigate around the world. And tonight, if you come to my webinar, when I talk about memory strategies, one of the things that I'm going to tell you is the best way you can improve your memory is to add emotions to the things you're trying to remember. If you're trying to remember definitions for this class, remember them with funny stories, things that make you laugh. If they activate that amygdala and that hypothalamus, your memories are going to be strengthened. Okay? And Bradley does bring up a good point. Thank you very much. I did see that comment earlier. Bradley does talk us, emotions help us understand how we feel about anything. You're right. Our emotions do help us evaluate how we are perceiving the world. And there are some people who have difficulty expressing or feeling their own emotions, right? Sometimes you might have that teenage son who's nothing but angry, and every time he gets embarrassed or sad or shy, he just expresses it as anger because he has trouble even reading his own emotions. I'm sorry, I raised 2 teenage sons, so I went through those angry days, man. Okay, all right, good enough. So now, sort of an interesting thing that I am going to add to this, your textbook talks about it, are some classic theories of emotion. Turns out that emotions are some of the oldest topics in the field of psychology. In fact, people were studying and thinking about the physiological basis of emotions way before we even realized that there was a hippocampus or amygdala or other parts inside the brain. These theories, and they all talked about the relationship between our scary thoughts and our scary physiological responses. So when you're scared, what happens to your body? Can somebody give me some physiological things that go along with being scared? Excuse me? You shake. What else? Sweating. Your heartbeat goes up. Absolutely. Anything else? Excuse me, what? Your body gets weak, right? Your eyes dilate, right? Yes, ma'am. Anything else?
I don't know, the stress
Your blood vessels constrict, right, absolutely, increasing your blood pressure and moving blood to the important muscles of your body. All of these are physiological responses that are contained in what we might call the fight or flight response, what's called the sympathetic nervous response. And all of these things occur because of this dumping of adrenaline and cortisol that occurs in your system as a result of your hypothalamus. Now, that's the physiological response. Can somebody tell me what's the physiological response for being sad?
Tears.
Oh, water coming out of your eyes, okay. It's weird, isn't it? Okay, what about
Your face starts to kind of light.
your face changes? Okay, right. All right, cool. Those are the physiological responses. Now, when you're sad, you think hopeless thoughts too. God, I hate this. My life is terrible, etc., etc., etc. So every emotion, if you will, contains a cognitive component, a thought, and a physiological component, which is something that happens to your body. Back in the 1880s, William James had a theory on how this worked. He suggested that there were physiological changes in our body, and these physiological changes caused our mind to become a certain way. So because my heart is beating and my eyes are dilated, I suddenly start thinking scary thoughts. So it's my physiology that causes the thoughts to occur. And there was this nifty experiment that they did with people. They had them take a pencil. I don't have a pencil here. And they had these people that, take a pencil and they put it between their lips in one of two ways. They did it this way. Or they did it this way. Okay, one is a smile and one is a frown. They then had the people read comic strips. And it turns out people who were making frowny faces when they read comics tended to find the comics to be less funny than people who were making smiley faces when they read comics. So the idea might be is that somehow your brain, your mind, interprets how your body feels. This is what's known as the James Lange theory of emotion. And so he argued that these arousal causes your heart to start beating, and you interpret this. Now, a fellow named Walter Cannon disagreed with William James. I don't know if you've ever heard of Walter Cannon. He's the guy who coined the term fight or flight, actually, right? And he suggested that they actually happen at the same time. So your heart starts beating and you start thinking the scary thoughts at the same time. So he would argue that the physiological response and the emotional thought come at the same time. And so these are sort of two theories that link our thoughts and our body physiology together. Now, a guy named Stanley Schachter argued this crazy idea. He argued maybe our emotions are actually determined by our social environment. Stanley Schachter was a social psychologist. I'm a social psychologist. And what he wanted to know was, what his theory was, he argued that a lot of different emotions have the same sort of feeling. So for example, when you're happy, your heart beats fast because you're happy. When you're angry, your heart beats fast because you're angry. When you're excited, your heart beats fast because you're excited. You notice something? We have three different emotions and they all have the same physiological response. So this guy, Stanley Schachter, said, you know what? What people might do is they might read the way their body feels and then they look in their environment to see what the appropriate emotion is. So he would bring people into the lab and he would slip them an epinephrine pill, an adrenaline pill, okay? And when you take an adrenaline pill, your heart's going to start beating, you're going to start sweating, you're going to start getting excited. He put them in a room with a person who either acted happy or acted angry. And after 10 minutes, he brought the person out of the room and asked them to evaluate their mood. And he found that after people had taken the adrenaline pill, their mood self-reported mood tended to match whatever happened in their situation. And then one last theory, which we're going to talk about because it's very important we're going to come back to this when we talk about stress and dealing with stress. Most people decide their emotions before things happen. They have beliefs that they've learned about things, and so they expect when something happens, they're going to have a certain emotion, and lo and behold, when they do, that emotion happens. A fellow named Robert Lazarus, he wrote, "The interpretation of stressful events is more important than the events themselves." Your car breaking down is not that big a deal. What determines whether or not it's a big deal is how you decide you feel about it versus how you decide you feel about it. Yes, sir?
Do you think that is also somewhat socially programmed? Are those responses?
What now? Absolutely, they are socially programmed. You learn them early in life, and then they take on a life of their own, if you will. Has anybody ever heard of the treatment called cognitive behavioral therapy? Anybody heard of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT? CBT is based on the work by this Lazarus fellow and this idea that we learn habits of interpreting the world early in our life that are either adaptive or maladaptive, right? So when my child was growing up, every time he had a test in second grade, if he wasn't nervous about the test, I interpreted that as him being a lazy student. So I would yell at my son. And he learned to avoid getting yelled at. He needed to be nervous about every test because that showed that he really cared. And after a while, that nervousness took on a life of its own. And now he sits in front of a therapist going, I don't know why, but every time I have an important event come up at work, I get nervous because I think I'm going to fail it and I'm going to be a failure in life. And the therapist goes, I wonder where that comes from. Now, this is not true. My kid's not like that. He's not in school right now. No, actually, they both have jobs. They decided they didn't want to be professors like their dads. They both eschewed the academic world for the work world. And that's okay. It hurts my feelings now. I don't know how I feel about that, Robert Lazarus. Okay, now, so I just want you to know that emotions and emotional functioning is sort of a learned component that's thoughtful, that depends on your frontal lobe. And the bottom part of it are these instinctual emotional responses that we have. And what's known as emotional control, okay, is learning how to control that amygdala part of your emotions. One of the things that you have to do as parents when you raise your children is teach them how to control their emotions, how to reinterpret things so that they don't have these emotional experiences. Because an emotionally out of control 3-year-old becomes an emotionally out of control 13-year-old, becomes an adult that can't have friends because they have a bad temper, an explosive temper. They don't get along well with other people. Do you folks know anybody like this? Anybody ever met one of these people? Right. Anyone ever be one of these people? Me, to a certain extent. Okay, great. Fantastic. At least now we know our problem. Step 2 is working on it. All right, now, let's see. Real quickly, an important part of emotions is reading emotions. And at the beginning of research into emotional theory, people tried to explain how do we divide emotions? How do we organize emotions? Should we have some sort of schematic where we have active emotions versus passive emotions? Come to some sort of dimensional approach. How are we going to describe all the different emotions that there are in the world? This guy named Paul Ekman did some really cool research, and he discovered what he believed to be evidence that we actually have evolved the ability to identify 7 basic emotional responses. He called these the primary emotions. And what he would do is he would take pictures. He did this cool international research. He would take pictures of people, let's say in Raleigh, North Carolina. He would tell them to make emotions. He would take those pictures, and then he'd carry those pictures to the most far-flung cultures. He went to the deepest parts of Africa, to these people who had never seen culture or Europeans or anything before, and he showed them the emotional faces, and he found that those people correctly interpreted these 7 basic emotions. He then did the exact reverse. And what he found is that wherever you go, a smile is a smile, and a frown is a frown. Now, that may not seem like much, but you'll go to places in the world where this means something good. Hey, good job, okay? And there are some countries in the world where this doesn't mean such a good thing, right? Some places you can point. Some places that's highly, highly insulting to people. And so all of these gestures that we use to communicate with people are very culturally defined. But what this guy Ekman found is that human beings, absent some sort of neurological problem, we all seem to be able to interpret these 7 faces. Now, what I'd like to do is to, oh my goodness. All right. Wow. Let's see if you can identify these faces. Now, what I'm going to do for you folks online is I'm going to let you look at my face online. Okay? The rest of you, I'm actually going to share a video that's going to be much more interesting to look at because it doesn't have me. All right? Well, what I'd like for you to do is see if you can identify these 7 emotions. Let's see. Angry. I'm writing these in contempt. Fear. Oh, disgust. I'm trying to write these in alphabetical order, but I screwed that up. Happy. Sad. Surprised. All right, so those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, folks, let's see if you can identify these. Let's go to here. Let's go to here. No, let's not. Let's go to right here for y'all. Okay, class, here we go. Do you know the 7 basic emotions? Are you ready? Are you ready, class? All right, here's the first emotion. Online, you're going to look at me, all right? Emotion number 1. Okay, all right. Online, what was that emotion? What was this emotion? All right, class, what was the emotion? Surprise. Did anybody look up here? Did I get it right? Yes, I did, dadgummit. That was, there we go. Yes, some people got it online. Oscar worthy. Okay, let's see the second one. That was surprise. Okay, good. All right, let's do the second one. Emotion number 2. Okay. What was that emotion? Can anybody tell me? That's pretty easy, right? Disgust. Did we get disgust online? So all of my students got surprised and they got disgust. Okay, let's go to the next one. Very good. Surprising how easy this is. Oh. There you go. What was that? What was that? Yeah. Contempt is when you raise half of the face. Contempt is raising. Disgust is when you raise it all. Contempt, you're just like, I'm not even going to give you the other half. I'm just going to give you half of the cheek. And we do have, oh, somebody said anger. You know, I do anger better than most people I know, so you might have seen that coming out, Sky, but I was trying to do contempt. All right, let's see the next one. This one's tough for me. This next one's going to be tough. Emotion number 4. I know, right? What emotion was that? Okay, duh, that was an easy one. Okay. All right, let's do the next one. Let's do the next one. The next one is, oh. Okay, what was that one? Sad. Okay, they got sad. My puppy dog. Okay, emotion number 6. This is a good one. What's emotion number 6? Ooh, okay. For those of you at home, I have mastered the art of this look. I've given it to many people at drive-thrus, my boss, students. What is it? What is it? Anger. And okay, and then the final one. The final one was I can't do that one. Okay, what was that one? Okay, that was fear. Absolutely. Okay, so we've got fear right there. All right, so what this guy found was no matter where you go in the world, people will identify these 7 emotions. They may not understand what you're saying, they may not understand your hand gestures, but people can interpret these easily, unless you have a disorder. If you're on the spectrum, oh my goodness, let's go to this slide. Oh, let's see, there we go. This slide right here. Unless you have a developmental disorder, ASD, autistic spectral disorder, those are the people, one of the things that they have difficulty doing is reading those facial emotions. Do you notice how easy that was for you to get those 7 emotions? You probably thought, this is the stupidest thing ever. Think about that, though. Even though it seems stupid, that's an amazing thing that it's so easy you can interpret those emotions. Now, this guy, Paul Ekman, also fancies himself to be an expert on deception and lying. And what he argues is that, remember I told you we have sort of a fast emotional way and a slow emotional way? Well, he argues that when we try to lie, we're trying to hide emotions. He argues that the original emotion sneaks out. He calls them micro expressions. And what he finds is that when I see you, if I don't like you, the first thing I'll do before I'll smile is there'll be a quick and then a smile. And what he does is he argues that our true emotions leak out when we try to lie. If anybody's interested, Google Paul Ekman and deception research. He is... What now?
There's a show on it, Lie to Me.
Lie to Me, okay, I wouldn't doubt that.
Yeah, that's an amazing show. It's based on...
Okay, absolutely. All right, fantastic. Culturally relevant here. All right, so... Real quick, you know what? What I'd like to do, students, those of you at home, I'd like for you to watch this short video, and then I'm going to show this same video to my students here at class. This video is about a fellow named Alex Honnold. I don't know if any of you have ever heard, has anybody in here ever heard of Alex Honnold? This guy likes to climb without ropes, and he climbed a 3... Okay, cool. Well, I tell you what, I sent it to those of you online. I sent you a 2-minute trailer of this video. Go ahead and watch it, and then let's talk about it in a couple of seconds. So go ahead online and watch it real quick. I'm going to switch the class to this, and then we are going to watch it ourselves.
Does it feel different to be up there without a rope?
It's obviously like much higher consequence.
People who know a little bit about climbing, they're like, oh, he's totally safe. And then people who really know exactly what he's doing are freaked out.
I've thought about all cap like for years, and every year I'm like, that's really scary. I'll never be content unless I at least put in the effort. El Cap is the most impressive wall on Earth.
It's 3,200 feet of sheer granite. It's the center of the rock climbing universe.
Obviously, I get interview questions about it all the time. Oh, would you like to do that? And you're like, yes, for sure.
So you have a girlfriend now, I heard.
It was awesome. Pretty much makes life better in every way.
It's really hard for me to grasp why he wants this. But if he doesn't do this stuff, he'd regret it.
Everybody who has made free soloing a big part of their life is dead now.
I haven't been injured in like 7 years. I suddenly start getting injured all the time.
What if something happens? What if I don't see him again?
I could just walk away, but it's like, I don't want to.
I've always been conflicted about shooting a film about free soloing just because it's so dangerous. It's hard to not imagine your friend falling through the frame to his death.
I think when he's free soloing, that's when he feels the most alive, most everything. How can you even think about taking it away from somebody?
No mistakes tomorrow.
Starting to get kind of psyched.
If you're pushing the edge, eventually you find the edge.
I can't believe you guys actually can watch.
Hey Jimmy, do you copy? Just started climbing.
Question. Why?
He's addicted to adrenaline.
Aren't there better ways to get that?
Subjective.
He's going to die, though.
We're all gonna die.
But wouldn't he? Not yet. Not yet, but I'd say he's in big trouble at some point. Everybody who does this for a living eventually dies. They don't say that about teachers. Yeah. Well, I guess we do eventually. Okay, metaphysically speaking. Okay, right. Okay. So why do people, what about that guy? You wanted to talk about submarines. Why would you want to go to the bottom of the ocean to see the Titanic? Why would you do that?
That's what I was about to say. I feel like at that point, it's just, what more can you know about the Titanic than you already see on TV? They made a whole movie about it. It's discoveries all over National Geographic. He's spending money at this point. Just doing what he wants to. Especially if he had a Logotech controller to control it, and there's no high-tech anything going on. You're just spending money at this point.
Right.
I just have it to give away.
Right.
If they're giving away money like that, then they can meet me in the front of the line.
Right. What about you folks at home? What would possess somebody to do that? Michael Caine online says this guy's amazing, but that's too much of a risk. Would you do something like that? Let's say you were that great at something, but there was the risk of death. Would you do it? Yeah? Huh. Okay. All right. So here's the deal. What I wanted to suggest to you is that along with having emotions, the other way that human beings differ from computers is we have motivation. We have this thing called agency. We have goals, desires, dreams. I want to visit 80 countries before I die. What do you want to do before you die? Does anybody want to run a marathon? Anybody want to run an Ironman? Anybody want to get a college degree? What is it you want to do with your life, right? Human beings have motivations where computers do not. If I put this computer right here, this laptop, if I don't touch this laptop will sit here and do nothing until the end of time. Chat GPT, I can open that program up, but as long as I don't type anything into Chat GPT, it will never do anything. It does not have a sense of agency. Computers do not have a sense of motivation. Human beings have this. And Skylar B says, everybody who made free soloing a major part of their life is dead now. Yeah, daring or stupid. Do you think it's, yes, sir?
No, so like skydiving is safer than going in a car. You know, skydiving?
Okay.
So it might be like safer. I mean, not this.
Okay, correct, true. Skydiving may be safer than a car, is it? Are you saying that, or are you saying hypothetically?
No, I think it is, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, but I have to get in my car to go to work. I don't have to jump out of an airplane to get to work. I guess I could. Thank you very much, Torrance. Okay, nice. Human beings have motivation, whereas computers don't. If you can think about a motivation, it activates you. It gets you started. Most of you decided it activated you. You filled out your application to come here to Wake Tech. It directed you. That is, you folks are in my class, not because you wanted to be here on a Monday or Wednesday afternoon, but you want a degree, and this class is part of it. So it's directed you to take my class. It's sustaining you. You are sitting here in my class suffering right now. I know you're suffering because I did the same thing. I know, but you're suffering because there's something at the end of this, that 4-year degree, my friend. And you know what? Some of these motivations differ in strength, right? I love to teach, but I really like to play guitar. I'm not a very good guitar player, but I love to play it at the house, right? So what do I love to do more? Well, I love to do this a little bit more than that. So you can think about human beings as being full of motivations that drive us. And so psychologists have been interested in trying to understand the motivations that drive human beings. Now, this chart is actually not in your book. I stole it from another textbook that I used to use. And what it does is it sort of organizes the 4 different schools of thought, the 5 different schools of thought with regard to motivation. Why do human beings do the things they do? You might ask these questions. And so what I want you to do, let's see, how much time do we have? A couple of minutes. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about needs reduction theories and maybe optimal level of arousal. So why do people do the things they do? Why does Alex Honnold do the thing that he needs to do? What would possess him to do that? What would possess somebody to go to medical school? What would possess somebody to do whatever it is they do? If you remember when we talked the first week of this class, we talked about the different perspectives on human beings, the schools of thought in the early 20th century. Each of these schools of thought had something to say about why people would do the things they do. Now, one way to think about it is that we all have these internal needs that drive us. So, why do some people become music stars? Why do some people want to be famous? Why do people try to become stars, YouTube stars? What now? They need to feel validated. What exactly do you mean by validation? You're right, I think, but. Okay. Now, are we being cynical because we're not YouTube stars, or do we think that's true?
It's all of us. I think that's part of it.
We all have a need for validation. Some people are driven more by this need for validation. All right, so the needs-based people were the first ones who they thought this was a great place to start. And so Sigmund Freud and all of his psychoanalysis people were all needs-based theorists. They tried to understand human beings functioning based upon their need. Now, I don't know if you folks have heard of Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was the first rock star psychologist. He may be full of crap. He may be a charlatan or a fraud, but he thought that everybody was driven by a need for sex, right? And so he argued that we have this need that drives us. Why do guys get big fancy cars? So they can find a sexual partner. Why do females maybe dress a certain way or act a certain way? Why do we do the things we do? Because we are looking for sexual partners. Now, it seems ridiculous till you think about it. Sex and reproduction is very important for any species. So of course it makes sense that that's built in there as a biological instinct. But what Freud argued was that these instincts go into our mind and then become wishes. So whenever you say, I wish something, what you're talking about is an instinct. I wish I had something to eat. You're saying that my instinctual drive for hunger is now welling up into my mind. And so he argued that all wishes are instincts, are needs that drive us. Now, Sigmund Freud and all of his group all had different reasons for why people do things. Freud said we all do things because of sex. People build buildings because they can't release their sexual energy, so they build something to replace it. It's called sublimation, right? But you know what? A fellow named Alfred Adler studied people who had birthmarks and other birth deformities that made them kind of weird. Has anybody ever known somebody who maybe had something weird about their appearance and it affected their personality growing up because maybe everybody picked on them as a little kid? Did anybody know somebody with a physical limitation like that? Well, this guy, Alfred Adler, was very interested in how people's physical limitations would affect their personality. And he argued that we all have this need to feel competent and superior. And he argued that we're all driven by a fear of inferiority. Has anybody ever heard of an inferiority complex before? That's an Alfred Adler term. He argued that sometimes you may not be able to escape your feelings of inferiority. So then what we do is we overcompensate to make ourselves feel good. So maybe, you know, what's the big joke we always make about the guy with the big fancy car? What do we always talk about he's overcompensating for? Yeah, he's got that he's overcompensating for his small ego. You know what I'm saying? Right? But although that's a joke and that's a facetious thing to say, what we do is a lot of us overcompensate for perceived inferiorities by trying to be really super good at something else. Right? Karen Horney argued that everybody wants love. We all are driven by a need for love. Everybody wants to be accepted. And she argued that some people, they don't feel like they're worthy of love. So what they do is they overcompensate by becoming somebody else. Have you ever heard about somebody with what's that disorder, that personality disorder where you need somebody to tell you what to do? Oh my God. Dependent. Codependency. Yes, I'm going to be just like you, because if I'm just like you, you can't reject me because I am you. Other people, on the other hand, have you ever met one of those people that likes to reject people first? Right? You know why they do that? Because they really want to be loved and they don't feel like they can be loved. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reject you first. I'm still alone, but that saves my ego, so to speak. So all of these, if you will, are theories that are based upon the fact that people may have needs that drive them. And the psychotherapists all thought that human beings had a need that drove them. Freud thought it was all sex. Alfred Adler thought it was all the desire not to be inferior. Karen Horney thought it was all about gaining acceptance. But they all argued because each one thought their motivation was right. Anybody ever heard of a fellow named Abraham Maslow? Abraham Maslow. little man syndrome. Michael Caine, he's talking about, yes, little man syndrome, Napoleon complex is definitely a way that people overcompensate for their inferiority. And you know what? I've been accused of having a Napoleon complex more than one time. All right, so Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, the neat thing about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I don't know if folks have heard of it before, but you probably said, so what? We have different needs. The interesting thing about his theory is he looked at all of the psychoanalysts and he said, you're all right and you're all wrong, right? People have different needs depending upon what's most important for them. So he said, really, rather than trying to argue about being inferiority or being sex or this or that, let's all put it together and say that people take care of the needs that are most important that haven't been met yet. And so he came up with this thing called the hierarchy of needs. You know what? If you're hungry and thirsty and haven't had anything to eat, you don't really care if people love you or not. You want food, right? And so he argued that that would be what he called prepotent. He's going to use a word prepotent. That just means most important right here, right now. Okay? Once you have that, people are looking for security and protection, freedom from threats. If you're afraid the police are going to come down and beat down your door, you don't have time necessarily to make art. You're just trying not to get arrested or killed by the police. Or if you're in a war zone right now, you're going to be thinking about safety and security. He then argued that people do have acceptance needs, but they only need these things after they have food and after they have safety, right? Esteem needs is the need to feel good about myself, self-esteem, and then other esteem would be you feeling good about me. I need to feel good about myself, and more importantly, I need you to think I'm cool too. And so he argued that all of these are needs that we have to have met. He called these deficiency needs. We need to fulfill them, but we shouldn't focus on them. You need enough food, but once you get enough food, you don't want to keep focusing on food because then you get overweight. We need safety. You need to be safe, but if you focus too much on safety, then you lock yourself in your house and you never come outside, and that's a problem, right? Some people need esteem. You need people to kind of like you, but if that's all you ever focus on, that can become problematic as well. And so he argued that what people, the healthiest people do is they fulfill these needs, and then they're looking for self-actualization. And what this guy would argue about Alex Honnold is he's got all of his needs fulfilled, and what Alex Honnold wants more than anything else is to express his true personality by climbing mountains. What is it that you want to do? What is that thing that's going to make you whole? What's going to be your need for self-actualization? And Abraham Maslow was not a very scientific approach. He did his research by reading about historical figures that he called self-actualized. So he looked at great people, famous people, and he would glean from their books these ideas about people's needs. Okay? And one last thing, I promise you'll find this interesting. How many of you are bored right now? Raise your hand. I'm bored and I'm talking, right? How many of you have been terrified before? Which would you prefer? Would you rather prefer to be super duper bored or super duper terrified?
The latter.
Bored rather than terrified?
Probably
Terrified.
not in danger, like physical danger.
Okay.
Or
Okay.
being bored sucks.
Being bored does kind of suck, but being terrified kind of sucks too. Really, if in a perfect world, what would you have? A balance. You wouldn't be too bored and you wouldn't be too terrified either. It turns out that human beings also desire this as well. We have this pons and this reticular activating system in the base of our brain that causes us to be aroused. And we want a certain level of arousal. Human beings who don't have enough arousal report being bored. People who have too much arousal are terrified. In fact, there are people who suggest that your personality theory is based on your brain functioning. They argue that introverts, their brains are so sensitive that they don't need much arousal to achieve optimal arousal. And so they don't like to be around people. But they argue that extroverts are people whose systems don't activate, and so they need more stimulation to activate their level of arousal. And so what we believe is that people have what we might call an optimal level of arousal. And the reason that people do things that engage in motivated behavior is to maintain a sense of interest and excitement. Now, I don't need to do all this stupid technology to do my job and get my paycheck. I really don't. I do this because it's kind of fun talking to you people. I do this so I don't get bored teaching introductory psychology 6 times a semester, every semester for the last 25 years. It could get boring, you know what I'm saying? So that's why I try to do it differently every time. Now, the neat thing is, if you click on this link I've provided for you right here, some people argue that sociopaths are just people who can't become optimally aroused the normal way. And what they argue is that you can actually go in and look at 3- and 4-year-old children's brains and predict who may have trouble with sociopathy later in life. So, if you're interested, I highly recommend reading this clinical psychology link. Now, why is optimal arousal useful? Sports psychologists use this. When you see athletes on TV, they are performing in front of millions of people. They get very, very nervous. One of the things we know is that when people have too much arousal, their performance tanks. If you're too nervous, you can't play that piano recital. On the other hand, if people are too bored, they don't work hard enough. So athletes work real hard to maintain what we call optimal arousal, and sports psychologists are people who help them usually manage too much arousal. Most professional athletes are dealing with too much anxiety that impairs their performance. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let you go for the day. I know you're bored. It's a sunny, wonderful summer day. Don't forget that we have webinar tonight. For you online students, you come in at 6 o'clock. For the seated students, I will see you at 7 o'clock. Your discussion board is due tomorrow night still, but if you want to do the webinar, it is tonight. Oh, and we are going to be talking about how to have amazing memory. So if you come to class, we're going to talk about how to improve your memory. All right, take care, folks. Have a great day. Torrance, I got you. Frederick, I got. Mariana, I got. Ariana's here. Andrew, okay, fantastic. What now? Yeah. Okay. Noah. Bradley was here. Torrance was here. Angel. And Andrew.
Last one.
Yeah, take care. Bye, folks.
When you texted me this morning saying, Andrew, I expect you to be in class today, that provided some extrinsic motivation.
There you go.
You know what I mean? Like, because I mean, usually, I was planning on going anyway, but
Right.
Thank you.